Wow, folks, we have a lot of cards to cover in this one. We got new cards for Warlock, Warrior, Shaman, and Druid cards that were just revealed. But we're going to kick things off here with a crazy new legendary. It's Commander Ulthok, a 5-mana 7/7. Battlecry, your opponent's cards cost health instead of mana next turn. So this one's a really risky card, but I think it creates some neat scenarios in game. So, you know, obviously you could plop this down on 5. If your opponent has 30 health, they functionally have kind of 29 mana to spend in a given turn. There is a chance they're like a combo deck and they just like draw their whole deck and kill you on the spot when you play Commander Ulthok. But if it's a deck that can't do that and they decide to spend, 10, 15 mana, they take a lot of damage. And if you think you could like maybe clear the board or stabilize some health, if you think they're not going to win off of that play specifically, you might be able to chip away at their health total pretty significantly for things like, say, a Curse Warlock, where it's like you need them to take some damage there. And with Curse Warlock in particular, you might be able to do that in the late game where you kind of set up a turn to win immediately following that with your curses. So it's like, look, as long as they don't win right now off the back of this Ulthok turn, I'm definitely going to win next turn because they're going to take like maybe 10 damage off of this turn. Or alternatively, if your opponent's scared and is like, man, I can't risk taking all this damage off of Ulthok, then they may not really be able to do anything at all. You might kind of interrupt their turn altogether and stop them from doing anything, which of course that gives you advantages as well. So, I can almost see this as a finisher of sorts where it's like, even like maybe it's a zoo deck and you've like chipped them down and you play this and you might limit their ability to do anything because they're going to die if they play cards. So it could be this kind of finisher in essence where it's like, look, I know they need at least like 8 or 10 mana to get out of this turn in a good spot. They're at 8 or 10 health, plop Ulthok. Maybe they can't get out of this turn at all. You set yourself up for the win. So I think a lot of people looked at this and kind of scoffed at it off and it's like, oh my God, my opponent has infinite mana. And that's true. That's a big risk. But I think there are some scenarios and some lines where this could create some problems for your opponent. I wouldn't sleep too hard on this card. I think there might be a deck that figures out a way to put this in action in a cool way. So let's talk about the other Warlock cards here. This is Immolate, new 4-mana fire spell. It lights every card in your opponent's hand on fire, and then in 3 turns, any still in hand are destroyed. So this is some sort of a hand disruption here for Warlock, where theoretically, if you play this on 4 and your opponent has a big high cost card that might be in hand chilling, you can pretty much guarantee that it's going to get destroyed by the Immolate because in 3 turns, if it's still there, it's going to get wiped. So you can maybe kill their high cost cards when you play this as a kind of combo disruptor. Beyond that, if your opponent just has expensive cards on average, it might be hard for them to play everything out on time, and you might just destroy a few resources here for 4 mana because they have a few things left. Or this could punish big hands in particular. If they have 10 cards in hand, it's very unlikely they'll be able to play out enough stuff for the Immolate to work. Now, this is a huge tempo sacrifice. You're giving up a 4 mana turn here just to deny resources and value and potential maybe like combo pieces. So that's not going to be easy for every deck to do. Giving up a turn 4, just getting hit in the face really hard, just letting your opponent overwhelm you. Like against aggro, this is probably just a completely dead card because they're going to dump their hands anyway. So, it's very specific meta scenarios, and I think decks with a lot of survivability and board clear would be the only ones that are able to run this. But if there is a really rampant combo deck and a Warlock deck with enough life gain and survivability, this could be a cool tool. Also, just a super fun card to play around with. So I think it'll have very limited competitive utility. It's just going to be hard to give up that much mana to make this work well, and it won't always work well at all, but still very fun. All right, next up here is the Herald of Shadows, a new 3-mana 4/2 Naga Battlecry. If you've cast a shadow spell while holding this, steal 2 health from a minion. So SI7 Agent's quaking in his boots here because this is a 3-mana 4/4 that deals 2 damage if all of these conditions are successfully met. And obviously that's a pretty nice little swing on board in the early game. I think the challenge for a card like this is what exactly deck is going to want to run this. It's not especially effective removal. It's mostly about the stat line you're getting on the back end. So it's probably something for a deck that cares a little bit more about bodies on board and tempo and a bit more aggression. Is that deck going to be able to run shadow spells successfully to activate this? Are they going to have played a shadow spell by turn 3 when this is probably the most effective? I don't know. That's going to be pretty challenging. And I don't think this gets great later in the game either. It falls off pretty hard in its effectiveness, I think, further along. So something like a control deck that's running some shadow spells, some Drain Souls, and a touch of the Nathrazim, they aren't going to need a card like this, I don't think. So Herald of Shadows, like it's good if you just, take it and look at it and all the numbers line up. It does a lot of things. It's big, but as far as deck fit, I think it's actually got some pretty big challenges. So I figure this one will probably fall to the wayside despite just looking good at a base level. All right, so moving on here to the new Druid cards freshly revealed. This is the Herald of Nature, a new 3-mana 3/3 Naga for Druid. It's got a battle cry. If you've cast a nature spell while holding this, give your other minions +1/+2. So a little bit similar to our previous card, but a big payoff here potentially for a token board. This could be a monster buff. And in particular, Druid is lacking wide board buffs a little bit right now with things like Arbor Up rotating out recently. It feels like Druid doesn't have great ways to support those big wide boards. There's like the beast-centric one. There's Pride's Fury, which is a little bit expensive and sometimes awkward because it's like mostly health focused. This buff is cheaper and puts a body on board and still offers the same attack upside of Pride's Fury. So I think this is kind of like a better Pride's Fury, essentially. Yes, you don't get quite as much health stabilization, but that extra minion and getting the same attack for 1 mana less is going to make this easier to weave into turns and just develop more stuff as well, which generally you're going to want more minions on board in a token deck. So I actually think this is going to be a pretty nice card for any Druid deck that's able to go wide and naturally run some nature spells, of which that's not a difficult thing to achieve for Druid at all. Often they very much do, even if they're summoning stuff, sometimes it's off of nature spells. So I think this is, only going to need a minion or two for it to make sense. And then the wider you go, the better it gets. A very efficient, very high output card. I think this one looks pretty strong. Next up here is the Spirit of the Tides, a 2/2 elemental for 2 mana for Druid. It says if you have any unspent mana at the end of your turn, gain +1/+1. So, you could play this out on turn 3, float that mana, and this becomes a 3-mana 3/4 that theoretically scales over the course of the game. If you float a mana every turn, this guy keeps getting bigger and bigger. The challenge here is I don't think it gets bigger quite fast enough, and you'd often rather just fill your mana than spend 1 mana to get an extra 1/2 on the Spirit of the Tides. I also think this doesn't really come out fast enough and scale fast enough to kind of like snowball. I think most of the time this will be fairly easily dealt with before it really gets big or becomes that threatening. And it just takes turns to scale this up, whereas most powerful early game scaling cards actually get, multiple card procs per turn, not once per turn, essentially, that it gets bigger. That's just going to take a really long time, and that base 3/4 is just not exciting at all. So Spirit of the Tides, to me, it actually looks really awkward. I don't think hardly any decks are able to play this one at all. And then finally we have the Moonbeam. This is kind of a crazy card. 1 mana spell. It deals 1 damage to an enemy twice, and it's an arcane spell. So this is intriguing because of the way that it scales with spell damage. Each proc of this is going to hit spell damage. So if you had like a Malygos, for instance, which is not currently in standard, but for the sake of example, this would deal 6 damage twice, or 12 damage for a single Moonbeam. Get any discounts, any kind of shenanigans in Wild, this could pump out some crazy damage on the back of a Malygos. But even in standard format, there are some things that have like +2 spell damage that are pretty easy to play off of, and this becomes a 1 mana deal 6. Which is still not really anything to scoff at. Combine that with like 1 other damage spell, a couple of these, you've got yourselves a little bit of a combo brewing. You got a stew going essentially on the back of some Moonbeams here. On top of that, it's kind of like an arcane shot essentially at a base level. And although Druid is not something that's run arcane shot, that model for cards has succeeded in the past. And I think that spell damage scaling is always something to keep an eye on. Like, I don't know that would be a deck right now, but in the future, as a finisher, definitely got a possibility there. All right, moving on to Shaman. Here we have the Command of Neptulon, a new 5 mana spell. It's a nature spell. It summons 2 5/4 elementals with Rush and overloads 1. And you got the 5/4 elementals over there. So this is just a big pile of stuff for 5 mana, right? Getting 2 5/4s with immediate reactivity that are also kind of just good threats on board, even if you don't use them to trade in. Like if you're ahead and play this, I think you're pretty happy to develop 2 pretty nice bodies. On top of that, this has potential overload synergies. I think it actually has like big spell synergies. It's not the biggest, but we have some ways to like cheat spells, copy spells, do those sorts of things. in Shaman as well, so that's a different angle for this card. I kind of think the numbers are just big enough here, and it has a few different angles that somebody's going to figure out a way to make this card feel good, and it's just very reactive and fast. Next up, we got some Murloc stuff for Shaman. This is the Tide Lost Burrower, a new 4-mana 4/4 Murloc with Battlecry Dredge. And if it's a Murloc, summon a 2/2 copy of it. So in total here, you're getting 6/6 worth of stats, getting to pick a Murloc of your choice, which I think is actually pretty valuable. You could do this to like pull out a Murloc War Leader, for instance, and get some nice big stats on board, or just whatever Murloc you care most about. Getting that choice is awfully nice. So if you're going to play for Murlocs, having a mid-game follow-up like this could be a good way to make sure you're hitting the right kinds of cards and just continuing to pile on stats. This still doesn't feel as fast or competitive as a package as Warlock Murloc stuff. Shaman side of things feels a little bit slower, so I'm not confident that Murloc Shaman will get there, but I think this is a fine card if it does. I mean, it's not super exciting, but Dredge is always something to keep an eye on. Dredge has surprised me with just how good it feels on average, and this is a nice Dredge card. Next up here, we've got the creepiest Finding Nemo dude ever. Nemo is scary. This is a clownfish, a new 3-mana 3/2 Murloc, and Battlecry, your next 2 Murlocs cost 2 less. So this is a pretty exciting card. This definitely helps Murloc Shaman get a little more tempo out, which I still don't know that this all comes together. Like the Murloc stuff just gets so big and so scary, but essentially this is like a -1 mana card. You're getting 4 mana and discounts here for the clownfish. So you're getting a really, really efficient 3/2 that's helping you swarm, helping you build out those big boards, helping you put bodies in to get buffs for follow-ups for Murloc Shaman. So I'm still not totally confident that's good enough for standard format. I just don't quite believe in Murlocs there yet, but with additional follow-ups, this card is the kind of thing that makes that very good. Mana cheat, big bodies, big boards. So very good card in a potentially unsuccessful package. That said, I think this is going to be completely bonkers in duels. Murlocs in duels can be really scary, so maybe not the best in standard still, but keep an eye out on this card being a scary enabler nonetheless. All right, moving over to Warrior, we have Clash of the Colossals, a new 3-mana spell. Super sick artwork here. Azamat and Epsilon fighting is so freaking cool. We're finally getting the conclusion of this storyline that was teased like, I don't even know, like 10 years ago in World of Warcraft or something. It's been forever ago. This one adds a random Colossal minion to both players' hands, and your Colossal is going to cost 2 less. So basically spend 3 mana now to cheat out a Colossal a little bit sooner than your opponent. And that's a neat idea. I mean, we've seen with things like Beast Hunter right now how good it can be to cheat out a Colossal a couple turns early. That said, random Colossals are pretty risky. Number one, like, you might get an expensive one, your opponent gets a cheap one, so you're still kind of playing them at the same time. You might get one that's more conditional, like Gigafin, that's like you don't really want to play that affordably. You're sacrificing mana now to get that discount later, so like, what did you give up in the meantime? Could this have just been a removal spell or some card draw that just plays better towards your game plan? Like, is that cheaper Colossal going to win the game? Not always, I don't think. It just feels like, like, why do you really need to do this? This is a fun card. I can't wait to play with this. It looks super exciting, but I just don't think that slightly cheaper Colossal is ever enough to swing a game, to sacrifice a card in your deck and 3 mana in the early game potentially to make it compelling. And then later on, of course, like when you're at 10 mana, this is not that exciting of a card because yours being 2 less is like, well, okay, I get to squeeze in a hero power maybe sometimes. You're like, okay, I get to play a 2-drop alongside it. It's usually not that compelling or exciting, and you're just giving your opponent an additional resource. Imagine that in an aggro deck. Like, oh, I gassed him out, but now I'm going to give him a Colossal. I just don't see how this one works. Moving on here to the Tidal Revenant, a new elemental for Warrior at 8 mana, 5/8. Battlecry, deal 5 damage and gain 8 armor. So I love cards like this. Like, just like, give me the big high cost stuff that gains me a lot of armor. And, you know, at first I was like, oh, you know, Moarg Enforcer, that big 8/8 taunt guy, he gives you armor. He's been played a little bit. It's a reasonable card. So maybe the Tidal Revenant will make sense. But at the end of the day, this doesn't have taunt. That 5 damage is fine. Yeah, I can go face. Yeah, I can clear a minion. But, you know, against a board of 3/3s, you'd probably just rather have the big taunted 8/8. And that card, of course, relied on things like Death Rattle synergies and resummoning and stuff. So Tidal Revenant falls pretty short there compared, I think, to the Moarg Enforcer. So I don't know why you'd even run this over that one in most scenarios. So, you know, really cool arena card. I'm sure this will be great in arena. It seems like an insane arena card. But as far as standard format is concerned, I just don't think the Tidal Revenant makes any sense. There are way better things you can do for 8 mana, both to gain life and to play threats. So I just don't see this one coming together. Next up, though, we have the Igneous Lava Gorger. I think this one's a little more intriguing. It's a 4 mana 3/5 elemental. It's got Taunt and Battlecry Dredge. That's always a nice bonus. As we know, Dredge can feel really good. And you're going to gain armor equal to the cost of the card that you dredge. So really intriguing for something like a Control Warrior that needs a bunch of armor, that tends to have, you know, a handful of expensive cards in the deck. You know, you just grab your Nelly, suddenly you've got 7 armor and a little Sinjin Shieldmaster on board too as a speed bump for your opponent. That's a really nice recipe for success for a control deck. There's also cards like Shield Shatter that are really insane to get off of this, because you're going to gain 10 armor off the Shield Shatter, even though it's not really a card that costs 10. And then presumably you're going to retain most of that armor as your opponent kind of trades into the Lava Gorger. And then you have a Shield Shatter next turn to like clear whatever board they play for. So I think this is a really nice natural fit. This card does a lot for 4 mana. And I think this is going to be a really solid option. Commander Ulthok is a 4-star card. Taking a bit of a gamble there. Immolate is a 2-star card. Herald of Shadows is a 2-star card. Herald of Nature is a 4-star card. Spirit of the Tides is a 1-star card. Moonbeam is a 4-star card. Command of Neptulon is a 3-star card. Tide Lost Burrower is a 3-star card. Clownfish is a 4-star card. Command of Neptulon is a 4-star card. Clash of the Colossals is a 1-star card. Tidal Revenant is a 2-star card. Igneous Lava Gorger is a 4-star card. And there you go. That wraps it up. We got 12 cards this time around. I feel like I actually went relatively fast for these compared to my normal self. But I think some nice stuff this time. We got some Murloc support. Warlock got some crazy cards. I don't know how good they're going to be, but very interesting designs. I think Warrior got a nice tool here. So excited to see all of these in action. What do you guys think about these cards? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for more reviews over the next couple days. And until next time, game on.